Okay, listen. I got something wrong with me. That's the first thing to know.
I got threads in my head. I got threads in my head, man.
I twitch and shout a lot. Makes me look like a damn freak show.
Can't you ever cut that out?
I'm sorry. Touch it, Bailey. I'm sorry.
But inside my head's an even bigger mess. I can't stop twisting things around, words and sounds especially. Have to keep playing with them until they come out right. Sorry.
Jeez, figured I asked.
Like I said, a damn mess. Then I started working for Frank. Frank Minna, Private Eye.
Boys.
Frankly, Franco.
He's the one who taught me how to use my head, turn it into a strength. He gave me a place in this crappy world until I screwed up.
Frank! Brooklyn, she's in trouble now. Ooh.
Does anybody know what Frank was into on this?
There's something going down, and it's big, and they were not happy about what he found.
We find who did this, and we square accounts.
If I figure it out, I'm gonna make him regret it. I promise you that. That's her. That's the girl that Frank was following. I think she found something.
What happens to poor people in this city wasn't news yesterday, and it won't be tomorrow.
Where's everybody go?
Mostly just disappear.
This town is run by Moses Randolph. When someone isn't seen for what they truly are, that's a very dangerous thing.
Do you have the first inkling how power works? Power is knowing that you can do whatever you want and not one person can stop you. Those people are invisible. They don't exist.
If you threaten his work, he will destroy you.
You all alone?
You got no idea.
You're webbed up in this somehow, and these people aren't gonna stop.
You got a head just like mine, always turning things around. Some people call it a gift, but it's a brain affliction just the same.
You remember what I said?
She doesn't know! She doesn't know!
What don't I know?
Awesome. Good?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out for what I understand is the final press conference of this wonderful festival. My name's Janelle Riley, and I'm sitting here today with two of the best working actors today. There's 7 Academy Award nominations sitting on this stage, not counting mine, between these two gentlemen, and countless remarkable performances, Willem Dafoe and Edward Norton. You both star in Motherless, Brooklyn, and Edward, you also, let me get this straight, you wrote, produced, directed, and I believe did the craft services? Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. I heard they were wonderful.
Marsala chicken.
That actually sounds really good. This is a movie set in the 1950s, and yet it is simultaneously timeless and timely. And from what I understand, you have spent 20 years trying to bring this novel to the big screen.
There were stretches where I wasn't trying particularly hard, as my partner Bill can attest. Let's say this: it's had a long gestation. I read it 20 years ago, but I knew at the time I wasn't going to get to it right away. So there was a fallow period while I was making Fight Club. I was directing another film, you know, and life goes on. Then I got around to it, and I had a I had a period of very fervent kind of inspiration around it, and then got very stuck, like classic writer's block, sort of stuck, put it in a drawer, and avoided it for a while. And then when I got back around to doing it and finished it, then it's just difficult to get these kinds of movies made. Mm-hmm. There was a good 5-year period between when I really had written it and when we were able to get the resources together and that was a fairly relentless push, that period. But so it had its phases. It had creative stickiness, and then there was just the struggle everyone goes through to get an interesting film made.
Well, so people weren't lining up to make a movie about a detective with Tourette's and OCD in the 1950s?
When you say, like, let's do a period film at scale about a Tourettic detective, there's lots of people who politely run away. But it's also, it had to do with the cast, too. I had dreams about really high-quality collaborators, and people have schedules, and it takes time. It takes time with things like this. It's worth waiting for, because when it all drops into the slot, you realize it was worth waiting for.
I mean, you made your directorial debut with Keeping the Faith in 2000, I believe it was, and I love this movie so much. And so I know you've been busy. It's not like we haven't seen you since then, but I do kind of wonder what took you so long. We've all kind of been waiting.
Yeah, well, some of it was a function of after doing that, I did have this one in mind, and it's a funny thing. Like there are aspects of my character in this film that I relate to and share, and I can get a little fixated on a thing, and I was a little bit I did obviously lots of work and as an actor and producer and things. I just directorially, things kept coming up, and I was like, yeah, but I want to do that first. Yeah. I didn't want to. I couldn't get the bug out of I couldn't get focused on anything else in terms of directing. It took a little longer than I intended, but it was all fine.
And obviously worth it. I mean, it is true, like, sometimes things come together at the right time for the right moment. I was thinking, some of these actors 20 years ago, might not have been available. I don't even know if Gugu was born.
Oh, God, that just slayed me. I was like, oh, my God. The truth is, too, in that intervening time, I worked with many great artists who I learned a lot from. I don't think I'd have been, even having done Keeping the Faith, the challenges of this film were enormous. There were some things, honestly, technically we couldn't have done. The cost of certain visual effects and the cost of the capacity to make a film at this scale in modern New York, I don't know that we could have done some of what we did on this film 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. Capacities changed, and so maybe it was all for the best.
Willem, I know you and Edward have worked together. Obviously, you're part of Wes Anderson's Repertory Theater Company. At what point did he sort of start talking to you about this? Was it 20 years ago, 5 years ago?
Actually, very close to shooting, actually.
Really?
Who dropped out?
Nobody.
No, I'm joking. But we were both in New York, and he said, listen, I got to talk to you about something. And he laid it out, and I was almost immediately on board. I could just tell by how he talked about it. And then when I read the script, beautiful characters, very, much of it speaks to me. It's resonant. And, beautiful thing is there's so many characters that, like my character, he's not what he appears to be when you first see him. That's true of many characters, actually, in the story. And that's kind of the key, because in the course of this story, it's peeling back layers. And what you find is food for thought.
I was actually trying to think, have you guys gotten to share many scenes together before this? Because you've done movies together.
We have one really funny. We have one very funny scene in Grand Budapest. It's the one that ends with you going, Mendel's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a prison.
I think you're sort of a shadow in the doorway, and I say like,
That's true.
who are you again?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
yeah.
but
I think that's it. That might have been it. I might have just reacted the totality of our on-screen time. No, you know what's funny is the thing is, as an actor, you are conscious of the psychologies of actors, and I maybe am oversensitive to like like Willem and Alec were people I had very much in mind. I was very determined to pull on New York actors that I just have a deep faith and deep admiration for. And the thing is, nobody likes going to somebody with sort of danglings, we're gonna do this when you don't know you're gonna do it, because there's nothing worse than teasing along someone you admire and then having to say, we haven't quite got it together. So maybe to a fault, I was sort of like, I'm not bringing this up with Willem unless we're making this movie. And then when what we needed all came together, then suddenly you're going, hey, we're actually doing this. It's always better to be saying we are doing this, but then the risk is, and it almost happened with Willem, that people's schedules are crowded up, I'm eternally grateful. I mean, Willem was making the Lighthouse movie, which is here. He was in the middle of a lot of stuff for the Florida project. Had him tap dancing through the award season, and it was I knew it was sort of like saying, hey, would you come in and focus on something at a time? It's tough to focus, but that
I was
wonderful.
very happy for it. I mean, even before,
Were you ever shooting two things at once, and you'd have to like go play a salty sea captain and then come back and?
No, but you get in ahead,
Yeah.
I was growing this beard for just a very specific thing. I was growing this beard, and I said, Edward, really, you sure you want me to play this? Because I'm committed to growing this beard. And I had a beard, 1950s. Doesn't seem right. Isn't it going to not work? And he thought about it. We talked about it. We really considered that. And in fact, it's it's not a choice. It was something that we had to deal with. But actually, I think it works quite well. Because
I was talking about that with someone literally last night.
It's an accident that you
It's an
embrace.
accident that, and it's like many. It's that constant reminder to keep your brain open to the way a thing evolves as opposed to the video in your head of it.
Yeah.
Because when I was thinking of the character of Paul, I thought like, who's got a face that looks like the world has beat them down, and and I thought, and I thought I want
was the
that.
beard.
I want
You
that
really
face.
wanted the
I don't
beard.
want, and then when he said, I got to grow this beard for this Lighthouse thing, your brain goes, no, I know.
Yeah.
But then we did meditate on it. I realized, but we had a hat. We put something in the hat, and I realized that when I watched the film, I couldn't be happier that we did that, because Paul feels like he doesn't belong. He feels like he's hiding how thin his face is, and it feels he feels, as does Lionel to me. He feels, we did that with Lionel. We didn't want to. Bobby, that people had Brill cream. People were all, what do they call it? Vitalis men, right? Everybody's using Vitalis and Brill cream and these things. And, we talked a lot about, we said, like, I think Lionel looks more like Jack Kerouac or one of these guys who's kind of a beat, kid. He doesn't have women in his life. He doesn't comb his hair. But I think we started to get this feeling of him and Paul being, these guys they're not in the polish of this culture. And I love the way that the beard makes Paul feel like he's in the margins of polite society.
It's funny, I absolutely thought that was a deliberate choice, because he's a little scraggly and, hiding in the shadows to some extent. You also could have technically CGI'd the beard off, but there's not been great success
I'm
with
not
that.
Who would have paid for that?
I don't have $200 million from Netflix.
Was the beard for Lighthouse or for Van Gogh?
No, I was growing it for Lighthouse.
Oh, okay. What was it like kind of carrying around? That's a very impressive bushy beard. I mean, did you like
is.
hiding behind it in public?
No, listen, I look at that movie, and I even look at this movie, and I say, really? I grew that? I don't remember.
So baby
It
face.
grows by itself, you know?
I do want to talk about this amazing cast because as a theater nerd, I couldn't help but notice you have so many great New York theater actors, from Cherry Jones to Bobby Cannavale, Dallas Roberts, who I know you did Burn This with. Have you just sort of been collecting people over the years, or were some of them new to you? Not in a creepy way, just...
No, Cherry I hadn't worked with. She's just legend to anyone who came up in New York theater. Cherry's, one of the all-time greats, and if you saw Cherry in Shanley's play Doubt, she originated the role that Meryl Streep played in the film, but she was that as much as anything I had in my when I was trying to think of who's this tough as nails, socialist reformer. I thought, sort of her for that role. But I think that my feeling was that I sometimes think that in films of the modern era, I don't know why there's an adulthood that's from some classic films that's elusive to me. Like when I look at films with people like Lee J. Cobb and the great character actors of some of the mid-century films, you think like, what these people feel more like adults in their 20s than a lot of us do now. And I wanted actors and actresses that had that weight of real authentic New York characters to give it that gravitas in a way and that sense of credibility. And I think for me those were just those, apart from being from New York, those were the actors that to me I also knew that my distraction as a director and actor in it, I needed people who were trained stagecraft pros, not going to need a lot of hand-holding from me. And so I went to kind of my roster of favorite actors from top to bottom in the film. There's, Josh Pais and Fisher Stevens and so many people that I've worked with, Michael K. Williams.
He's fantastic.
I think people that to me have a kind of a particularly New York kind of poetry to them.
This cast is so amazing. I felt like every 10 minutes I was like squealing the next time someone came on stage, to the point where I told you the person sitting next to me moved because I was so excited by this amazing ensemble. I guess sort of the two newcomers to your world are Gugu and Mbatha-Raw, who is, so wonderful in this movie. Were you familiar with her work? Or?
I was, yeah. She I'd seen her in Belle. I'd seen that terrific Black Mirror episode that she starred in, and as I started to contemplate, I watched Beyond the Lights, which I thought she was great in. I think that, and then I met with her. She read the script and was very, very responsive to it, and we met. And she also is a RADA trained actress. She's
she's
got
British,
deep theater experience, yeah. But I felt of all the roles, I felt that maybe that Laura was the one that I wanted to have not an unknown quality, but a quality of mystery, uncertainty as to who she is, not as well known, and not as well known and a performer, so that the audience is experiencing by proxy the same thing Lionel is experiencing, which is, wow, this person's very striking looking. Oh, and then when I meet her, oh my, what this fierce intelligence, and then a sensitivity, so that there's an unfolding experience of her qualities and her gifts. And I think if it was someone, not that there aren't some terrific pop stars who can act, but if it was burdened with that, I didn't want someone kind of at first glance going, oh look, there's so and so. You wanted Laura to have the allure and mystery that Lionel that's pulling Lionel toward her. And I thought Gugu's at that wonderful kind of moment in a career where people are aware, but they want to know more. They want to see her in more. And so it kind of fed the dynamic in a nice way. And she's just got all the things that I thought were perfect about. She's incredibly, bright and smart and articulate, but also just has this terrific access to deep feeling, and she's just a terrific actress.
As a director, were you involved in, I mean, you had a great casting director on this, but were you involved in, everything from even 2-line roles? Did you want to have a say and be in that room?
Yeah, I mean, my partner Bill, who's sitting here, and I, who produced the film, we've known each other literally since the year out of college as actors, and we like to say that our bench of people we want to work with in New York is deep is an understatement. I don't think there's a role with a line in it in the movie that we didn't have an idea about a couple people who we'd like to slot into it from the folks we like. The guy who plays the Cherry Jones's sort of partner, the reformer who's giving the speeches, literally went to NYU with Bill, and the guy who plays the mayor is someone I used to do plays with at the 29th Street Rep when I was 24, and is a terrific actor. So there's a lot of people in the film who we it didn't take us long to fill out the cast list. Yeah.
Did you have any auditions, or was it?
Yeah, we had a few.
Yeah,
We had a few.
yeah.
The kid who comes up to the trumpet player in the bar and gets blown off
Yeah.
In a savage way. We had some. We
Yeah.
had some, and it was fun. But I not to equate my film in a highfalutin way, but when you read about Orson Welles doing Citizen Kane, one of the things that's really cool to me is he pulled on his Mercury, all his radio players, all his, he was the prodigy of the WPA theater program, and was doing his, and he had this. Everyone in Citizen Kane is out of Welles's deep bench of people he had worked with before, Agnes Moorehead and all those people, and I love that. I think that's I think that's a great tradition.
I mean, auditioning is such a weird process. I can't, I don't know how else to do it, really, when you're looking for people, but it is nice to just be able to call people know who are going to kill it. Just curious, when was the last time either of you auditioned? It's probably been a while.
I don't know, you do a lot of fashion campaigns and things like that. I'm always,
So I say, I'm not coming in, just look at the magazine.
Yeah, exactly. You say, maybe, yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, it is. You were actually pretty famous for your Primal Fear audition. It's kind of become legendary how you sort of won that role.
It was like the Nirvana demo tape of the mid '90s. I don't know what I've auditioned for.
Last thing I auditioned for, I probably went on tape for Spider-Man.
Really?
Yeah. I was shooting a film in Spain, and they flew someone to shoot me in a hotel room.
They doubted that you could be the Goblin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Morons.
Did you have a beard at the time? Maybe you just needed to prove it. I am curious. I don't know, because Willem, you've worked with so many amazing directors. Have you ever worked with a director who was also your co-star before?
I have.
Yeah.
But this was full on because, Edward owned this material so much. And the cool thing, you're talking about the actors, it was so fluid. And part of deciding to do it is it just had an energy about it that I really wanted to be part of it. And when you are on the set, something happens that's very important, I think, for a performer, is where you forget about yourself and you're there for the world. And that all comes from people being there for Edward and being there for the screenplay and the story. And it happened with everybody. And if you can get that environment, then I think you can't, in a funny way, you can't go wrong because everybody's in a place where they're, you know, it's integrated. Nobody's going in this direction, and it's all together. You're making something that is a thing, a living thing that breathes and can move and can take you places you don't even know it's going to go. And you always try to find situations like that.
I also, it's funny, you don't always, I wouldn't necessarily say that I look for people to have an authentic alignment with their character. I mean, you want to believe an actor, you know, is gonna do well in it, but in a funny way in this one, I felt with Paul, especially, to me, Paul's really like, in many ways, he's the moral man at the center of the story. He's the Jedi in rags in the beginning. He's the keeper of secrets in this kind of, you know, wandering in the desert, but with all of his incorrect suppositions, Lionel thinks this guy's a crank, or he's the one who set this up, and it turns out he's the person who really is the deepest expression of care for other people. And I did feel when we were talking, one of the things I mean, I knew, you know, Willem, I knew has a conscience, like, and he is a person who cares about social justice issues, and I think I would have struggled actually with that role if it was someone who I think's a terrific actor but is sort of a cynical shit. You know what I mean? I'm not sure I would have. I'm not sure I would have felt that there was a depth of real commitment to, you know, that idea that Paul has sacrificed himself for the well-being of other people, love of other people. As he says, you can't. You know, he says you can't serve people. You have to love people to serve people. And I think that we talked about what it was about, and I think, you know, that there are themes in it and parts of the history of this film that I think we actually bond. You know, we felt aligned in caring about. You know, and that to me that helps feed the work too, because there's a conviction in it. You know, there's a certain conviction comes.
So take two. Welcome back, everyone. We were talking about the beautiful city of New York and people who come there sort of to seek their dreams. I don't know if you're comfortable picking up on that thought.
Well, I wasn't totally articulate about it, but you know, there's two forces. There's kind of like two poles, and in a funny way, they're represented by Alex's character and my character. And you know, this isn't a polemic. It doesn't totally condemn that character, of Alex's character, for example. Personally, maybe. But you listen to his arguments about why he does what he does, and it really connects you with the fact that, you know, politics is personal. It stems from who you are and what your considerations are for how you treat other people and how you live in the world. And you're constantly hearing things from his character, things like, you know, the engine and the objective of life is action, you know. It's not about knowledge. Okay, you hear that, and of course you go like this, but then you kind of say, you ask yourself, how much is that true, you know? And then you see Paul, and he's obviously a compassionate guy, but he's kind of hedging his bets too, because he has this nagging thing where he wants his project to be done. So there are a lot of arguments that are floating in the story that make me think of New York, make me think of politics today, make me think of you know, power and abuse of power and how power is, how people arrive at power. So it's very resonant for me. It's like, it's always interesting when you tell one story and another story emerges.
Yeah. And when did you come to New York?
I moved there right after college, so like this summer, almost 30 years ago, summer of '91.
And what do you love so much about that city?
You know, there's a lot of great lines about New York. I like John Updike's line that real New Yorkers in their secret heart think that people living anywhere else must be in some sense kidding.
I've actually never heard that.
That's a super snotty New Yorker line. I think that New York just New York is it's its own thing. It's a great American city and it's a great world city. It's all of those dimensions. It encompasses an incredible density and diversity of people and forces and shapes, and I think one of the things I've always liked about New York, especially, is that people are chasing so many different dreams in New York that nothing really rates.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're a big shot at that, whatever. It's kind of like but nothing. There's hierarchies everywhere, but New York's hierarchies tend to get atomized by how many people are engaged in so many different things, and it creates this kind of like egalitarian sensibility. I can't explain it. New Yorkers don't get too impressed by any one thing, and I like that. I think that it's literally what Willem was just saying. There's a competition of ideas going on in New York that is healthy, and I think and so it is a metaphor. I think what the push and pull between what versions of what progress are we trying to get toward, what version of ourselves are we trying to be, is always, to me, at play there. And in that era, in the 50s, the thing is that what went on, it had huge ramifications because the rest of the country modeled itself on a lot of what happened in New York in that era. So the things like the slum clearance plans that took down lots of middle class and working class minority communities to be replaced by what came to be called the projects, which themselves then became some of the worst slums. This happened in New York and was replicated. It was replicated elsewhere. So it had the decisions and the drivers on those decisions in New York in that period reshaped all of America in a lot of ways.
These are excellent points, but I want to add they also have the best pizza.
Yes.
If I may be superficial.
There's that.
I was talking about this amazing cast you have, but also below the line, you've got the best of the best. Dick Pope is your cinematographer. You got Tom York to do some music.
Oh, those are very above the line people.
Sorry, Dick. And to that end, in recreating this New York of old, you literally recreated Penn Station in the 50s.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. You really can. I've made this joke, but it really is true. You when you kind of walk in a room and go, we're gonna do this and we're gonna do this, we're gonna see this, it's madness. It's like you're, and then all these other people come in who have incredible talents and kind of make a director look like they actually had a vision instead of an insanity. And I think, Dick Pope is one of the great cinematographers of the modern era. He, apart from shooting every Mike Leigh film, I did The Illusionist with him and completely was in awe of him. I thought he had he has had over the years in his Academy-nominated stuff like The Illusionist and Mr. Turner and others, but in Vera Drake and he consistently, I would look at films he did specifically that were in a period sensibility, and I was just in awe of his gift for making it feel present and real, not slapping a patina on it, if you will, a sepia tone or something like that. And so he was like it was like having a master painter work with you to create the atmosphere of a time. Beth Mickle, who is one of the great production designers of the era, and did that. I made jokes about Netflix, but what Beth made happen, in terms of bringing that era in all of its, from jazz clubs to halls of power, is truly a masterwork, I think, of design. And Amy Roth's costumes, and then Daniel Pemberton's score, who's a prodigy. This guy's a prodigiously talented composer. We got Tom York and Wynton Marsalis working on dimensions of the music. All of those things, I always say, like, I don't think people really grasp the degree to which you can cut a film, you can cut the text of a film and the performances of film to the exactitude of the frame that's the film. Everybody says, oh, you know, that's the film I love. But if you saw that film without the layers of the color correction that a guy like Dick does, the music, the visual effects. We had over 680 visual effects shots in this film, all coordinated by a brilliant visual effects supervisor named Mark Russell. And these, you know, without these layers of shellac, it just looks like a finely made piece of furniture, but it doesn't look great. It's, you know, all the polish and the veneer that makes a film sort of become hypnotic and magical comes from those layers that are not often as appreciated or understood.
I'm going to open up to questions in just a minute, but obviously we have to touch on your performance because you're playing a man. They never specifically come out and say he has Tourette's, but I assume it's Tourette's, but also some obsessive-compulsive disorder issues. It is so realistic, and it is not one of those movies where he only has Tourette's when it's convenient to the plot, if that makes sense. Like, this is a fully committed performance. Where did you even begin? Because that's something that I have to imagine you want to get exactly right.
Yes, in the sense that the number one thing is that that's the heart of the book. The Jonathan's novel, Motherless Brooklyn, is a contemporary novel set in the 90s, but it is the same. The emotional core of it, of a lonely, isolated person who works for a private eye, who's his mentor, loses him and gets sent off on this adventure. That's the core emotional strain, you know, heart of the book. And a lot of the dynamism and the kind of the wonderful experience of being inside his head and outside as well as he navigates his affliction that's the core structure of Jonathan's book that I loved. And mostly I just wanted to be true to that because his book creates an affinity. And it was really, actually, when you saw the movie, one of the first things you said is, like, that made me really happy was Willem hadn't seen it. I mean, and at one point, he kind of admitted to me, I don't really know what happens in this movie. Like, he's like, we did our bits, and he was like, the truth is, I really didn't know what happened. But you were saying, like, you know, 5 minutes in, I remember you saying that you were sort of like, okay, I'm with this guy. You know what I mean? That's what you want. I think the main thing we wanted to replicate from the book was that sense of affinity, of empathy. And for all the talk of, like, this being a noir, the truth is, in my mind, I thought as much about movies like Forrest Gump or Rain Man that I loved, you know, where your sense of sympathy or for an underdog is what actually powers the whole thing, you know, and where they take you, the adventure they take you on is hopefully rich and fun and whatever, but secondary in some ways to getting an audience to root for the underdog. You know what I mean? And I think when people align themselves with an underdog, honestly, they feel better about themselves. We all feel better about ourselves. It's like the underdog reminds us to be more empathetic, reminds us to be kinder, and we don't like when the world is coming in on our guy, you know. And if his characteristics are strange and interesting, then it becomes the vehicle for the journey. I felt that Tourette syndrome is it has a kind of anarchic, creative beauty to it in the sense that it's very individualistically expressed. It doesn't, no two people have the same symptomatic expressions of it. Some have vocalizations, some have very minor physical tics, some have very severe physical tics. Some people get fixated on words, some don't. People who have the word fixation, they get fixed on certain words for a certain period of time, and then their word changes. Yep. You know, it's truly wild. There's no other way to describe it. But within that is a lot of liberation for me as a performer, because the blend, you can come up with your own blend in a way. And I cherry picked dimensions of the specific things Lionel deals with from the book, from people I had met who had really, to me, interesting or expressions of their Tourette's syndrome, and so there's both a desire to be faithful, but then a really wonderful feeling that you can be creative.
I remember watching it, how I realized, from the very beginning, it kind of opens up language to you in a different way, and also exposes certain kind of social conventions in a very quick way, which is a good place to be when you're watching a movie.
Yeah. There's something beautifully honest about Lionel, because in some ways he has to be. I am curious because you're sort of known for really diving deep into your roles, and I would think a character like this, you would almost have to stay in character between scenes, but you're directing. So was that possible, or would Lionel sometimes bleed over into the directing?
I'm sure there are other people who would emphatically say yes. I think that. Look, people running around screaming in the streets of New York is hardly like novel to most New Yorkers. I think that it wasn't like a certain. The part of Lionel that kind of can't move on from a thing until it sounds right is probably led to moments where there were a few takes more than we needed. That compulsion to perfect something I relate to. I think that practically speaking, I didn't feel on this one that I could be a good director for other actors and be,
But you were.
Shouting and screaming.
Lionel directed this movie.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it.
Honestly, some of it's a blur, but I think that I allowed for myself on this one going into it that I was not going to be able to sustain what I would call like a bubble of total concentration for myself or the other actors that I might, in some circumstances, want to sustain. That it was just going to be, that we were going to have to all be sort of what I would call like technical pros and be able to drop in and drop out of it.
But don't you think also because you had wearing so many hats and you were so overwhelmed that like there was no room for any kind of indecision or a certain kind of reflection? You were so well prepared that as the story went forward, you're really in it in a very urgent way.
Yeah, and I think that's intrinsic to making films too, especially let's call it big films or films that are going to go out into a wide scope like ours did. You have to have a certain. You have to have a certain almost. You have to almost be like Patton. Like you have to say we're moving through the enemy. We're going to take casualties along the way, but we're going. Like you can't. You just can't stop. You have to be. You have to be a little bit not just pushy, but you like in a weird way. There's times when you have to be insistent on the path, on pushing down the path that you've set for yourself, because to your point, like if wobble comes into it, like you can go off the rails really fast. I remember actually Francis Coppola, like a long time ago, I asked him one time, like, what's one piece of advice, like if you're directing a movie or something? And he said to me, without hesitation, he said, walk onto the set in the morning and go, we're doing this, and then go. What the fuck am I, doing for the rest of the day? He said, because if you walk on and go, well, maybe, okay, well, maybe we'll do this. He goes, the crew will go, we're gonna go play Frisbee. You know what I mean? Like while you figure your shit out. And he just was just like, walk in with a plan, get people moving, and then do whatever thinking you need to be doing, but but have a plan of action. And I think it's very true. I think most of the best directors I've worked with, I think, do know, they know what has to get done within the confines of the day, and they have a plan for doing it.
And you also have to, you know, as a writer, you're sitting there probably maybe throwing out alternate lines. You're thinking as a producer, you're making chicken marsala. Like, you have so much going on. I can't even imagine. Oh, yes, we are going to go to some audience questions right here. Yes. Oh, sorry, I forgot there's a microphone. Right here.
Hi, good morning. My question is to Mr. Norton. I'm Alessandra De Tommasi from F Magazine, Italy. I would like to ask you if it had happened in your life to turn your vulnerabilities in your strength, as we have seen in Lion in this movie, and also, if I may, your artistic legacy will live forever through your jobs, through your works. As a human being, since today is 9/11, so we are overthinking about our world, if there is any topic or any theme that is close to your heart as a human being that you would like to be remembered to have done something, a little something forward for this world. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably, the second part's easy for me. I feel that I've spent a lot of my time engaged in environmental challenges of environmental sustainability and conservation, and I think that to me, almost all of our geopolitical squabbles and cultural squabbles are like people arguing at a dinner table while the house is burning down around them. I think that we've got a generational challenge to deal with the global climate crisis that we're accelerating into, and I think it's something I think people need to be engaged with from every walk of life. So that's been my primary, the voice in my head that said, this is something that you need to be involved in some way or another. Could you, the first part of your question?
The first part of the question.
Oh,
your abilities and strengths.
Yeah, I mean, I think good characters that interest me are characters who they represent us, but they have but in a heightened way. You know, so to me, like, most of us don't have Tourette's syndrome and that kind of affliction, but we can relate to the feelings of isolation or being misunderstood. So I think characters that seize on our imagination are sometimes ones that take very universal sensations a lot of us have, and they amplify them in a really compelling way. And I think that's, you know, Lionel's to me is obviously his are very unique, but as Laura points out to him, everybody's got something that they're struggling with on a daily level, and his challenge is to go from being essentially a mute and passive, a person only living within the bubble of his affliction, and grow and become in some ways more heroic by acting and caring and becoming not just stepping into the shoes of his mentor, but going beyond him and actually becoming uncynical, deciding he's gonna, you know, participate in the fight. And I think that that's everybody's. That's why I liked his story, because I think that's everybody's challenge. I think everybody's challenge is to figure out within the balance of their own limitations that they're always beating themselves up over, to kind of, you know, rise above it and apply their gifts into whatever, you know, endeavors they're engaged in.
We have one back there.
Hi, Russ Nelson, Red Carpet News. A question for both of our distinguished guests, if possible. Back here with the cameras. Sorry, way back here with the cameras. Mr. Norton, you are a writer, director, and actor of astonishing prowess, and I wonder if, as all of those things, you could articulate what it means for you to be a storyteller and why you have devoted so much of your adult life to that pursuit. And on a lighter note, Willem, Edward praised your expressive face earlier on, and I wondered how you feel about the fact that some of your most memorable expressions on screen have become wildly successful internet memes, whether that amuses you as an artist or not.
Do you see those memes? I don't know if you're very active on social media. Or...
I'm not. Yeah. But somehow they find their way to me.
Is it flattering, weird, both?
It's weird.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I don't think about my face, but I have noticed that sometimes if I don't think about my face, it does things I don't want it to do. It is expressive, and that's a good thing for an actor, but sometimes it's too expressive. End of story, really.
You know what surprises me is I assumed that there would be tons of Bobby Peru GIFs, whatever. And I actually very rarely see that. It's usually
well, that's
Psycho.
a shame.
There was a period where the magician David Blaine, who's a friend of mine, he helped me with card stuff on Rounders, and then The Illusionist. We had a period in our early friendship, like over 20 years ago, where we actually had competing Bobby Peru answering machine messages.
No.
We would leave them for each other.
You're kidding, like what?
Oh, I'm not doing it now.
Oh, come on.
You gotta do it in front of the real Bobby Peru.
Yeah, his best lines.
You quoted him earlier in the Wes Anderson movie.
You know, it's funny because I think like actors have very different quality. You know, like it sounds really pretentious, but I do think like an actor's face, their body, their voice, they're their instruments, and many there's gifts, there's talents that people develop, and then there are just sort of some of the gifts that they're given. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there's your face, there's your voice. I find myself constantly riveted by actors who it's like I covet the musicality of their voice. You look like a Tony Hopkins or a, Ralph Fiennes, like people, people I think have like these incredible sonorous, mellifluous instruments in their vocal tone. Not just, in Tony's case, it's like that Welsh music, that Richard Burton kind of thing, or someone like Rafe who's trained, that the voice that comes from the training of a classical actor, and sometimes there's and people have the way they look. Some people are trapped within it. They're much less versatile. You know what I mean? I've known actors who I think probably would have liked the opportunity to expand, but they don't have the physical. They don't have that physical plasticity in some ways. So being an actor it's a strange thing because you're working with your kind of God-given gifts and attributes and things, and then there's the work you do to figure out how to put that into play. It's kind of it's strange and mysterious.
Did we get your first question answered? I'm sorry, I can't. Oh, sorry.
With everything that goes on, or in and around movies and celebrity culture and commerce and all of it, all of that is sort of noise. That if I can succeed in pushing that away, I retain a real faith in, or a conviction that telling stories has meaning and plays a role in the conversation between people about who are we and what are we trying to figure out about ourselves, and self-knowledge, self-awareness. So yeah, I do think that storytelling is important. I think there's storytelling in our politics. there's storytelling in our there's all kinds of storytelling going on, and so I think it's understanding narrative and understanding how we make people feel more in touch with each other, more understanding of each other through stories is important. It's and I think you know, it gets all thrown into the blender with stuff that is there's the high fructose corn syrup version of storytelling that I think tends to make people very passive, very much a like, I don't want to think about anything, let me watch other people come and save the world, and, you know, etc. And then I think there's storytelling that demands or tries to pull out of people active engagement with it, which I think I would argue is more nourishing for people. But, you know, everybody is doing what they're doing. That's the kind that I find compelling as an audience and in terms of making it. I actually loved. I thought what Cameron Bailey's I've seen a couple screenings. Yeah. And the invocation he's been doing at the top of all these festival screenings about like, this is the land that we're on. It didn't strike me in the slightest as sort of like a political, you know, I thought that was very powerful. Yeah. Like the invocation that like, we're in a place that has a really, really deep story to it. You know, it's like, it is what it is now, but it has been, there have been people here for a long time getting together around fires and telling stories and stuff. I loved that. I thought that was like, it kind of gave me a chill. It was like, we're part of that. We're doing it, and everybody's getting together here in Toronto to kind of watch stories. It's great.
Do we have time for one more question? Sure, right here.
Andrew Marsall from AFP. William, I think you mentioned how the film relates to abuse of power and some things in politics today. And I was wondering if, Ed, you could talk a little bit about particularly Alec Baldwin's monologue about sort of entitlement, being above the law, the way that he treats women, and how, if at all, you wanted that to relate to what's going on in the world today.
I mean, I think that the themes within what he says are pretty apparent. I don't feel like they need over explication, but I think I'm interested in the psychology of what how power twists and sort of tips over into entitlement is a good word. I think you used that word. I think that it's part of the interesting dynamic to me that Paul Willem's character talks about how, even in describing his brother's own journey toward a kind of darkness or a darker expression, he says, you know, he had an ideal. They had an ideal together. They were working toward something, and somewhere along the way, it tips into where the allure of power, the allure of you know, not needing to answer to anyone else starts to corrupt all and metastasize into all kinds of other expressions of that. And I, you know, I think that a lot of, honestly, Willem's character has a lot of the, I think that idea too that he says, look, you know, we're walking around like calm as Hindu cows thinking we live in a democracy, so what could go wrong? That to me, the things that threaten the more humanist ideas about how we're going to treat each other aren't a function of the era we're living in. They're a function of like a human impulse toward accumulating power. And I think Milos Forman used to say to me, you know, he lived through the Nazis and the Soviet state and all of it, and he used to say, this stuff never goes away. You know, you have to constantly be pushing identifying its presence and pushing back against it. And I think that those things were certainly of interest to me. And I think Alec, Alec has a remarkable, he's really got a remarkably great gift for language and for understanding, I think, like the relish in some ways. The thing that really spooks me when I watch his performance in that is just how you can feel the unapologetic place he's reached, which I think we're seeing, we're seeing that things are being reveled in these days. I mean, it's incredible the degree to which vulgarity, bullying, violence are being reveled in, and I thought like it was interesting to look at like what leads a person to get to the place where they're actually celebrating their capacity to behave that way.
It is eerily timely. We are out of time, but I just want to thank you guys for helping us close out these press conferences. I want to say, as a fan of your directing, please don't wait another 19 years. But it was well worth the wait. Thank you guys so much for being here today. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.